Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and we'll be asking, are NHS doctors playing God by taking life and death decisions in the hands regarding their patients? And in this programme today, I'm joined by Tim Dieppe, who's Head of Policy at Christian Concern, together with Robert Harris from Voice for Justice UK. So, gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Great to see you.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
And Tim, I'll start off with you. We all appreciate the incredible work that Christian Concern do in terms of protecting Christian freedoms in this country. Do you want to give us a little bit of an update on some of the cases that you've worked on and why it's so vital that you continue to work to defend Christian freedoms in this country?
Well, thank you, Simon. It's great to be with you again. We have about some 2 or 3 dozen live cases at the moment of Christians who are facing trouble for expressing their Christian views or expressing their Christian faith in the workplace or in other contexts. Many of them free speech related issues, also related to abortion and various other issues as well. One that's prominent is Councillor Lawal, who was cancelled by, I think, 7 organisations, including the Conservative Party, for his tweet about pride. And so we're trying to help these Christians and encourage them, and we've actually won, I think, £500,000 of compensation in the last year for our clients, which is a fantastic result. And we also just ran the Wilberforce Academy for young people to inspire them and equip them for living in challenging times, and looking forward to discussing this particular case with you today as well.
Excellent, appreciate that very much. And also, it's great to see you, Robert, and we also have to acknowledge the great work that Voice for Justice UK is doing as well, particularly when it comes to Parliament and influencing parliamentarians on the importance of our Christian faith in this country. So do you want to give us an update on the work that you've started in terms of the Commission of Inquiry that looks into the discrimination and marginalisation against Christians in the workplace, in education, and effectively every other sector of British society today?
Thanks for having me back on the programme, Simon. The Commission of Inquiry was launched last week. Voice for Justice UK commissioned this inquiry. There is now a call for evidence that's open to the public. So if you're a Christian and you've experienced discrimination, injustice or stigma on account of your Christian faith, you can apply to the Commission to have your case heard as a witness. This is going to sit for 2 years, this Commission, and we have, I'm pleased to announce, quite a number of very distinguished patrons who are supporting us publicly with their name. You can read that on the website. There's the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. We have an Army General. We have distinguished members of Oxford University, people from journalism, the church, education, and also one of our commissioners is a very distinguished barrister who specialises in religious liberty in this country, Paul Diamond. He actually worked on the British Airways cross case, which many of us will be aware of. So this is a very exciting project, and we're very pleased to be working on it.
Absolutely. So if you have, if you've experienced discrimination for being a Christian, you can go to the website, which is on your screen now. Tim, when I spoke to you before, you recommended that we cover the story regarding this young woman who's only 19, and for legal reasons we don't know her name, only ST. It was covered by the Daily Mail, and according to my notes here, the doctors are protecting her real name, who died last week as her end of life care was stopped due to her being conscious but wanting to live. Can you just share with us the background information regarding the story regarding...
Yeah, sure. Well, Simon, we've all heard of cases like Charlie Guards and Alfie Evans and Archie Battersby, these very sort of acrimonious end-of-life cases where there's a dispute between the family and the doctors about what should happen to these young children in the end-of-life case. In all of those cases, the patient was A, named, but B, unconscious. In this case, very unusually, you've got this 19-year-old Christian girl from a Christian family who is conscious, whose brain is fully functioning and who is able to express her own wishes, The courts have ruled that she should remain anonymous, so we only know her by this sort of acronym ST. That's all we can say about her at the moment. That's her name, ST. We're not allowed to name the hospital or any of the doctors or anything like that either. It's a very draconian order, which means a lot of people haven't heard about this story. The court ruled very, very disturbingly back in August that she's not mentally competent to make her own decisions about her end-of-life care, even though 2 expert psychiatrists had said that she was mentally competent. Because she's actively dying, that therefore it would make sense for her to be moved on to palliative care against her wishes. And I think that's a very disturbing precedent indeed that's been set there by the court. Now, she sadly died just this week, or was it last week? But still, you know, a very dangerous precedent set by the courts, and we're still bound by this transparency order. We can't disclose her name.
And also, Tim, we just shared about the rare genetic disease that ST had and how she was also dependent on a dialysis.
Yeah, so she had a rare genetic mitochondrial disease. That means the muscles weaken and fatigue, and her hearing weakens, and her kidney in particular weakens. So she was on a lot of intensive care treatment and regular dialysis for that. But she wanted to keep fighting it. She didn't want to give up and go on palliative care. She wanted to keep fighting. She said, "I want to die trying to live." She's very conscious of that. She said another time, by the time you read this, I may be dead. She was not delusional, not sort of, not disregarding the fact that she was very seriously ill and might die very soon, but she wanted to die and trying to fight, and that was where the doctors disputed with her.
And Robert, we know that Voice for Justice UK, and you've definitely specialised this in your own personal work, highlighting end-of-life care, which is pretty horrific in this country. So what do you make of the case regarding ST and her treatment?
Well, in this very tragic case, I think 2 principles that stand out legally speaking in every part of the case is best interests, what's in her best interests, and mental capacity. So the Mental Capacity Act 2005 features prominently in the legal rulings around this case. So the question is, did she have mental capacity? Well, according to 2 court-appointed psychiatrists, she did. However, she believed that she wanted every chance of life available, and there were some hospitals in North America, Canada was specifically highlighted, where a new form of treatment was being offered to her. It wasn't guaranteed, but it was the chance of survival, the chance of prolonged life. And the judge believed that she was delusional in believing that this prospect was something worth believing in, rather than opting for the prospect of end-of-life care, which was being offered to her. So the question is, if she was delusional and therefore didn't have mental capacity in the eyes of the judicial ruling, what about the doctors in these very hospitals? Are they delusional as well? Because that's really where the logic goes. So it's very tragic that she wasn't being given this chance of life. And let's remember, the NHS was not being called upon to come up with the money for her to be flown over to North America. The parents were unable but wanted to actually publicise this case so that they could raise money for her to be transferred to America. But that didn't happen, sadly.
And Tim, is there not, as you mentioned earlier in the programme, a real danger and a precedent being set here by NHS doctors who in the case of ST are making those life and death decisions on this young woman who had a terminal illness but was conscious and wanted to live, and her life was ended prematurely because the doctors went against her will and the concerns of the patient?
Well, I think that what's disturbing about this judgment is that they use this term actively dying. What exactly does that mean? What does it mean to be actively dying? I mean, if I've got a chronic illness, does that mean I'm actively dying? There's no legal definition, there's no clear definition of what it means to be actively dying. So if doctors decide you're actively dying, where does that leave you? Well, according to this judgment, even if you don't want to be put on palliative care, you want to try and live, even if you're consciously trying to express that, the court will rule, oh, well, you're just delusional, even though the psychiatrists say you're not, and they'll just put you on a palliative care pathway and off you go. So I think that's very, very disturbing, and we're going to try and fight that and resist it. The other thing is, of course, is the transparency order, which is very, very harsh. I mean, she can't be named. Even the family can't even tell close relatives what's happened to their daughter. I mean, on fear of potential imprisonment, and breach of a court order. So it's very draconian and very, very harsh. And that's the reason why many people haven't heard of this case. We've all heard, as I said before, of Charlie Gard, Archie Battersby and Archie Evans and all of that. But I hope this will be made public. It's going to court on Friday this week. And we'll challenge the transparency order then, and we'll see what happens. I believe that one day we will be able to name her, and that then her name will become public knowledge, and hopefully a photograph of her and all this kind of thing can be published. She can be properly remembered, and hopefully remembered as somebody who ends up protecting other people, because her precedent is regarded as a bad one that shouldn't be kept. But we'll see. I think it's a very dangerous precedent that's been set in this case.
Yeah. Robert, are we not in real danger now that we're seeing the influence of our highly kind of secularized society now, where we are losing our moral perspective, losing focus on the importance of sanctity of life, but also dying with dignity, as highlighted by this young woman, ST. What are your thoughts on the vital importance of the sanctity of life and dying with dignity?
Well, we all agree in the sanctity of life principle and dying with dignity, and let's even extend that thought. I don't think there's a judge in the country or a public figure in the country who will say, I don't believe in the sanctity of life, or I don't believe in dying with dignity. The question really is in the application. We all agree on the basic principle, or at least we say we do, but how the tie hits the ground in an individual case, that's what the issue is. So in this particular case, she wanted her right to life to be upheld because of her sanctity of life, and she wanted to die with dignity. But in this particular case, it meant being given every chance, and that was denied to her. So the application in this case, unfortunately, was not successful of those two principles.
And Tim, you mentioned, and we mentioned in this programme, that there is a legal battle over ST. Thankfully, you sent me 2 articles that were 2 front-page stories in the Daily Mail covering this issue. Yeah. But share with us how the law is being implemented in order to protect doctors and also this hospital from journalists actually reporting her name, and the implications this has for freedom of speech. But surely...
Well, I think the principle of open justice is very important, isn't it, Simon? Yeah. If it's out in the open and everyone can see and read and understand exactly what's happening, and it can be scrutinised by the media and scrutinised by journalists, and people can talk about it, then dark deeds don't like the light shone on them, do they? Right? And so it's hidden behind, hidden away. We don't know about it, and then they can, we just turn off this machine quietly, and if nobody knows about it, it'll all be fine, kind of thing. So we think it's very, very important to fight for open justice in cases like this, and we're campaigning for that. We have won a legal step along that way in one of our other cases recently, but it's still not got properly affirmed. It's going up to another level of court before it gets properly determined there. So this is a battle that we're fighting now to get open justice for these cases, so that they're not kept in the dark, kept quiet. Only the Daily Mail was willing to report it. No other media outlet, I think, has properly reported on this because of this draconian order, which we're going to challenge this particular one, but we're also challenging the principle in general that in order to have justice, it needs to be open. And if it's kept secret, the danger is dark deeds are done in secret.
Yeah, but can you also just unpack for us the legislation that the doctors and this NHS trust have been using and applying in the case with ST to keep our identity hidden?
Well, yes, they applied for a transparency order on the basis they wanted to protect what was happening and not allow the doctors to be identified, not allow the hospital to be identified, and not even allow the patient to be identified. And the courts granted this very, very draconian transparency order. And that's what happened here. And that means we still don't know her name today. And
Robert, we know ST was a young Christian girl. She's only 19. And that she wanted to live, and of course her parents and herself wanted to raise the money, not being paid for by the NHS, but to actually get on a flight, risk her own life by going to Canada in the hope that this new preemptive drug may have a big impact and may actually save her life or give her a few years. Just share with us why she wasn't allowed to do this and the principle of why she wasn't, and her parents weren't allowed to fundraise for her to fly off and get this new treatment that they've discovered in Canada. Sorry.
Well, as Tim pointed out, they believe that she was actively dying, and of course that has an open meaning. How long does it take for someone to die? The family weren't allowed to reveal her identity, as has already been indicated, and their own identity. So it was very difficult to fundraise for the prospect of getting the sufficient money, you know, to get her flown over to North America. I think this brings up a very serious issue of state overreach, because there's definitely a place for the state to intervene in these sorts of cases if somebody cannot make their decision. And maybe if there's no family, for example, in the most extreme cases where somebody might have Alzheimer's, there's definitely a place for that. But I think one of the messages I want to actually convey today is that I think in this kind of case, we have a very clear illustration how the state has overreached itself into areas of people's freedoms to make their own decisions about their own welfare.
And Tim, doesn't this raise a very concerning issue regarding the sanctity of life and end-of-life care? The fact that ST, this young 19-year-old woman, had it up here mentally, you know, she wasn't in a coma, she wasn't unconscious, and therefore she could make decisions for herself, and yet she was denied those decisions to actually to live as long as she was able to live for.
Well, Simon, it's extraordinary that the doctors and indeed the court as well were so dismissive of her own expressed wishes. She even had a lasting power of attorney signed about her end-of-life wishes, and they just dismissed it as, oh, well, she's not mentally competent, she's delusional, whatever, in spite of the psychiatrist and all that kind of thing. So it's extraordinary that the doctors in this case think we know better than the patient herself, you know, what's best for her. You know, and claims she's delusional because she doesn't believe them, even though the doctors have been telling her for like 18 months, you could die any day now. And obviously, after many, many, many days, she decided, you know, I'm not going to necessarily, you know, believe everything they say at face value entirely, quite understandably. So, you know, but then the doctors to say, well, if you don't believe us, then you're obviously delusional in spite of psychiatrists. I mean, it is an extraordinary case, Simon, and I hope the precedent gets overturned, and I hope this never happens again.
And Robert, we also have to think of poor ST, that knowing that she's got this rare genetic disease that she was dying from, and having to go through the stress of all this with court proceedings, the doctors saying they're going to end her end-of-life care, for example, knowing that she then wouldn't have very long to live. I mean, the stress of all this with a family as well must have been absolutely immense. And surely this also led to her deterioration in her situation that eventually led to her death.
Well, it must have been absolute hell for her. I mean, we do know that her family showed unconditional love to her right until the end. And that is actually cited in the judgment for what it's worth. But I think this case, like so many similar cases, brings up the question of best interests. And once, of course, they've decided that you don't have mental capacity, they decide, the court decides what your best interests are. But we are of the opinion that she did have mental capacity. The two court-appointed psychiatrists said so. And therefore, why is the judge, the court specifically, taking it upon itself to decide what her best interests are when it is contrary to what she wants? Very strange.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you want to elaborate a bit more on that one? The fact here we have the courts intervening in this situation, going against ST's own wishes, and then the doctors complying, almost as if the judges and also the doctors in this case are literally playing God, deciding life and death decisions, and not allowing poor ST to make her own decision about how and when she would die.
Well, that's exactly what's happened, Simon. That's exactly what's happened. They disregarded her own decision, her own will, and her own what she wanted to do. And I think, you know, we've established a number of principles that we want changed in law in relation to this. One is open justice, as mentioned before. One is mandatory consideration by an ethics committee of the hospital before they make any application to withdraw life-changing treatment. One is that you ought to be able to instruct your own experts for the court to look at, to assess the mental capacity and the medical situation and so on. One is that you ought to be able to apply for treatment elsewhere at no cost to the NHS and go for that. That's been a disputed issue in many of these cases as well. One is that the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled Children of people with disabilities should be incorporated into law. That was ignored in the Archie Battersby case, and the UN said, please wait for us to rule on this, and they just ignored it and went ahead and did it anyway. We recommended all these things to the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, which was commissioned by the government to do an inquiry on this because of the high publicity of these cases. And the Nuffield Council just ignored these recommendations, didn't even engage with them at all and didn't recommend any of them. And I think that's absolutely shocking, because who could object to mandatory consideration by an ethics committee, for example? Who could object to instructing your own experts in a court thing? And who could object to, another one would be allowing adequate time to respond to legal arguments. But the Nuffield Council just didn't engage with these arguments and ignored them without even properly commenting on them. And I think that's very, very disturbing as well.
Yeah, and Robert, do you want to unpack this very concerning liberal agenda and the ideology behind such a practice? Because I think it's important to unpack the decisions made by the judge and also the doctors that are literally playing God in this situation, and particularly the situation regarding ST and her end-of-life care.
I think something we haven't mentioned that really answers your question is the family, because the family were central to this appeal in getting the wishes of their daughter respected, and they were denied that. So the state, as in so many other cases that we have discussed on previous programmes, the state is usurping what traditionally has been the role of the family to make their decisions as they see it. So we're seeing this over and over again. The state is usurping so much of the domain of the family. So that's very worrying.
And I just want to, in memory of ST, and this was published in the Daily Mail last week, these are her last words that she gave to a reporter at the Daily Mail. She says, by the time you read this, I could be dead. That's according to my doctors, who for the last year have repeatedly told me that I only have days to live. They've done everything they can to stop me telling this story. But lying here in my hospital bed, I've managed to dictate this message. I found myself trapped in a medical and legal system governed by a toxic paternalism, which has condemned me for wanting to live. But I'm a fighter and will continue to fight. I am in a race against time to escape from the system and the certain death it wishes to impose on me. Robert, what do you make of her last statement, the incredible bravery and the courage that she's shown and a will to live in this statement?
This is what every human has, the will to live. It's very touching. The desire for survival is the strongest instinct that we've been given by God. It's the strongest instinct. So I can only say that this needs to touch a nerve with all of us in society, and we need to, as a society, reconsider what powers we give to the courts. That's a big question. It's going to take a long time to answer that question, but we need to go there.
No, absolutely. And Tim, what do you think will happen when her ST's parents and her daughter's name ST is actually released in the public? How much relief and comfort that will actually give them? Because when we're talking about doctors, when we're talking about hospital trusts, when we're talking about judges, there is also a family that are grieving the loss of
there is, yes, and certainly this transparency order is only adding to their grief and their stress and their difficulty. They can't tell any of their closest friends or relatives what has happened to their daughter. I mean, how awful is that when you're suffering from grief? One of the things you want to do is talk to people about it. It's one of the most helpful things to do is tell people about it and talk to people about it and talk it through with people and talk through all the stresses and strains of what the doctors said and what they didn't say and all that, and they can't do that. How awful is that? Now, the court hearing is happening on Friday. I really hope it changes, but it may, the judgment may be reserved or whatever. We'll see what happens. But I really hope they change it straight away. I mean, it ought to be changed already as far as soon as she was dead, they ought to have changed it. There's no justification in the first place anyway. I really hope it changes very, very quickly. That's my prayer. on Friday, and that they are then able to talk to people about it and tell people about it, and also that it goes out into the media much more than it has been, because we'll have pictures and a name, and that's what you need these days in a world of media and social media. You need a picture and a name in order for it to gain traction and people to get the sympathy, and I hope that then it gets widespread coverage right across the media of why was this girl's wishes openly disregarded by the courts.
Yeah. And Robert, if we look at this in a more philosophical light, is the case regarding ST happened primarily because of the massive secularisation of our society, the blurring of current moral values, and effectively state overreach over the family and also over the church as well?
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think when you have a society with law, but no Christian principles that motivate and give it the spirit with which it needs to be applied, I think you're in trouble, because law can be very callous, it can be very heartless. Rules on their own, you need mercy, you need openness, you need love, you need transparency, and these are the principles that for so long our society was built on. It was never perfect, but I think we're going in a direction, a trajectory in society now where law is, for its own sake, it needs to be respected. But the question is, what's the philosophical, as you point out, what's the philosophical underpinning that gives that law a special place in society? And that's where Christian message that underpins it comes in. And unfortunately, we have lost a lot of that.
And Tim, are there members in Parliament that are interested in bringing up a private member's bill on this one, so we don't have another young person like ST in this awful, tragic situation again, when it should be their decision whether to live or die rather than the courts or NHS doctors?
Well, certainly there are many MPs who are very concerned about this whole issue of end-of-life care. There's an all-party parliamentary group on dying well. And Danny Kruger has been very, very outspoken on assisted suicide and euthanasia and these kind of issues. The government, in response to the high profile of some of these other cases, did commission this inquiry into it. We don't like the result, but at least that shows the profile of it, and it probably will get discussed in Parliament. And I hope that many MPs will speak up and say families' wishes should be respected in cases like these.
Absolutely. Tim and Robert, thank you so much for doing a great job on this week's Politics Today, and I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. I think in this situation, we've got to continue to pray for ST's family, pray that the right decision is made with the court decision that is made on Friday, and pray that righteousness and justice will prevail once again in this land. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.